Yeah, hey, I just had to subscribe to Apollo Detectives because somebody unsubscribed me.
That
Yeah,
happens quite a lot, doesn't it?
yeah.
It probably wasn't Dave who unsubscribed you.
Just looking at the stats, Apollo Detectives is down 28 subscribers. We haven't received one sub in 2 weeks. The impressions have gone down 608, something like
Oh,
that.
crazy.
And the last video we did, we got 13,000 impressions, which means they showed the thumbnail. So they're cutting it back, back, back. But then we took a look at the graph and it goes like this and it just goes.
Yeah.
YouTube has basically killed that channel.
Anyway, I guess what
Yeah.
we need to talk about is a little bit of reality because there's so much bullshit out there, so much fantasy, so much everything going on. And I mean, our topic is reality, so that could be a little bit boring. Maybe that's part of it. People need to
Yeah.
be exact. This trip that Artemis is doing with 4 people on board, we have to get into the reality of that. These people are going to be sitting in the same seat for 10 days straight. They're going to eat, sleep, and do their business in that seat for 10 days straight. And they're going to be in a craft that is 316 cubic feet.
And you're right about that because there's going to be four souls on board. One of them's a woman. So, how's that going to work when you have to go to the bathroom? Well, they fixed that problem. They put a little privacy curtain in front of it. And the toilet is right underneath the dash, upside down. So basically, you're sitting upside down while the other three are flying the craft.
Yeah, well, they're not actually flying it, they're just along for the ride.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But what you have to realize is they've got these movie costume designer one-piece suits on, which means they have to take these things off. They still have diapers that are actually taped to them. And
Yeah.
then their washroom facility is just nothing more than a commercial vacuum cleaner. You buy one at Home Depot or something like that. But they're going to need to have a hand to clean themselves up from this mess that they're going to be making. If they're doing 3 diaper changes a day for 10 days straight times 4 people, you have 120 used diapers in there. It's not like you can open the window and air the place out either. Okay. But you are sitting there and just imagine people need to understand the reality. Who is actually going to be on board that thing for 10 days, not being able to move? You're in the same spot for 10 days straight. Just that alone. Quite possibly, if you're actually in zero gravity when you're traveling, anything that you're trying to clean up is just liable to float away. And it's going to be around inside the craft. You imagine that?
Yeah, but Scott, it was just like the floating turd. Remember? We have the
Yeah.
floating turd mystery over here when it comes to Apollo. And it
Yeah.
says the floating turd mystery that still haunts NASA to this day. Day 6, 05/13/2955. Commander Module Pilot. I didn't do it. It ain't one of mine. I don't think it's one of mine. Oh, mine was a little one. Sticky at that. Throw that away.
Yeah. That's all that you're going to find in the transcript. But that is basically what is missing in the transcript from the
Yeah.
original Apollo, because it's going to take time when you're in that kind of a situation, in that kind of closed space. You're right beside each other. But these one piece suits, I mean, you got to get right the hell out of these things to do this business. And on top of that, you've got a woman on board with 3 guys. I mean, basically, she's got to just lay back, spread her legs, and have somebody wipe her down, clean her up, and tape a new diaper on her. The fact of the matter is, if they send anything around, there won't be anybody on board. It's just going to be another CGI or reproduce.
No, they're going this time because people are going to be watching it. There's going to be third party.
Yeah.
That means the craft is going. It doesn't mean the people are on board.
Ah, yeah, but there's a big difference because you can see the people in the window. Those days are finished. Either they're going or they're not.
The other thing I wanted to say is this launch is going to be quite different because the Apollo Saturn V rocket was 7.5 million pounds of thrust. We have all the telemetry from the launch up into low Earth orbit, parking orbit, and it's 9 minutes and whatever to get there, and it's like 12 seconds to clear the launch tower, everything else. It has a payload of 282,000 pounds. 141 tons. But this craft is sitting on top of the SLS. Instead of 7.5 million pounds of thrust, has 7.8 million pounds of thrust. And it has less than a third of the weight at liftoff because there's no lander, there's no anything. The Artemis craft, the Orion spacecraft, is 2 tons lighter in weight, even though it's 1/3 larger because of modern materials. So that alone. So instead of having all of that and you need that launch trans-earth fuel to get you around the moon, you might have maybe 100,000 pounds total weight that's lifting off with 7.8 million pounds of thrust. It should clear the tower in less than 4 seconds. And instead of at 1 minute and 42 seconds in when the first stage of the Apollo lifts off doing 6,000 miles an hour at 70 kilometers, they should already be at 160 kilometers up there.
Yes, well, let's take a look at this chart here. Apollo versus Orion, mass and design comparison. Crew capacity, Apollo, 3 astronauts, Orion, 4 astronauts. Notes, Orion supports longer missions with more life support volume. Then we get to the crew module. Apollo CSM, 12,250 pounds. Orion, 4 astronauts, 22,900 pounds. Notes, Orion CM is larger and stronger with modern avionics and safety systems. We slowly go down the list. And then we get to the main engines. Apollo, CSM. Now we get to the Orion main engines, and we have the AJ-10-190 reused shuttle OMS engine. Here's the funny thing. Same engine family, improved reliability. Well, they said the same thing about the solid rocket boosters. Same engine family, improved reliability. And what did we see with the improved reliability? That rocket tore itself apart. Last but not least, the thermal protection. Apollo CSM, Avcot ablative, Orion, Artemis II, Avcot modern formulation. Same material used, modernized manufacturing. Well, how come we look at the Apollo ablative shield and it's burned away, but it worked apparently? But then we look at the modern Avcot formula and there's holes burned through it. So how is that going to function? You know, the same thing. It's all this new and improved. And as soon as they add new and improved, usually it's the opposite. That's what we've seen.
Yeah.
Except the stuff that's the new and improved has not done a re-entry at the same speed that Apollo did.
No, that's true. The first test of the Orion capsule was done in 2014, and it returned at 80% of lunar orbit return speed. So it wasn't a full test. And anyway, you've also got the real problem of the little holes drilled through the heat shield or the ablative material to support the service module. The service module is contained below the Orion craft, same way the Apollo service module was contained below the craft. And when they separated, so the Apollo craft could return to Earth, allegedly, they had to use explosive bolts to separate the Apollo command module from the service module. Those holes that were in the ablative material, the heat shield, had to be filled with small plugs. Now, if those plugs did not enter the heat shield correctly, you get the same effect as you did on Challenger and on Columbia. It would disintegrate.
Who put the plugs in?
The plug came in automatically.
Yeah, but how do we know that the plugs were seated correctly?
Exactly.
Yes,
Look at what happens on the re-entry to a space shuttle when a couple of heat shields go missing.
Well, you know what I'd like to know, and it's a good question, I think. Why do they need this astrorad radiation protection on the astronauts? In other words, they're wearing those vests underneath the suits. Why do they need them now and they didn't need them back on Apollo?
because they've done more testing and they found they needed them. Because if Apollo didn't happen the way we've been told it did, if Apollo was basically a fraud, a fake, and a hoax, when it was sent out beyond the Van Allen radiation belts all the way to the moon, landing on the moon and then come back again, if that was all fabricated, they wouldn't have tested much of the equipment. 55 years after Apollo 11, they've realized that there are a lot of other things which need to be confirmed as being working, such as the radiation protection. That hasn't been confirmed yet.
Okay, well then let's take a look at the readings from Artemis and compare that to Apollo. There's not much difference. That's what they're showing us. And
Yeah.
yet they're going to need this astrorad radiation protection now when they didn't need it back then? Well, they're showing us the readings. Are we
Yeah.
getting the correct readings? I don't think so.
Well, you see, fantasized generated data is of no use. And that's why most of the files are missing. Most of the data is missing. That's the same as the construction of the vehicles themselves. All of the plans, everything else are missing on those vehicles because it was never built and it was never actually tested.
Yeah, but like you said, let's go and take a look at the missions that were supposed to happen after Apollo 17, Apollo 18, 19, and 20. Where is all that hardware? At Kennedy Space Center and in other places. And then
Yeah.
we have Neil deGrasse Tyson here saying, oh, wow, the rockets are still there. I mean, Apollo 18, that rocket didn't get used, so why don't we just take that and use it?
Because that was supposed to have been successful, the Apollo rocket. We've yet to see Artemis be successful. It hasn't been tested in the same way that Apollo was. And anyway, this Artemis II mission is just a repeat of the Apollo 8 mission, which was orbit around the moon.
Yeah, which Apollo 8 never happened. So
Apollo 8 didn't happen because the Soviets had been very clever and transmitted from a tape recorder. Was it Zond 5? They sent up, turned the tape recorder on, and you got astronauts' voices describing their approach to the moon. The Americans panicked. Oh, the Soviets are going to land humans on the moon. We've got to get there first, guys. So Apollo 8 was rushed into action with astronauts on board. It hadn't been tested. Apollo 6 was an almost disastrous launch of the Apollo 5 rocket, and yet they were prepared to launch astronauts when the safety of the astronauts wasn't guaranteed. Well, if they didn't go to the moon, it was just a practice run on how to fake Apollo. They did a
might
very
have
good
learned
job.
it from Orson Welles radio broadcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like what it says here, It says, perhaps we found the LM-13, the lunar module for Apollo 13, because I'll tell you where it is. It says, the Apollo 18 lunar module was only partially completed before the mission was canceled. It was later used as a prop for the 1998 HBO miniseries From the Earth to the Moon and is now on display at the Cradle of Aviation Museum on Long Island, New York.
Into a museum, is what you said earlier.
And the other Saturn V components, that is, parts of the rocket and spacecraft built for the later Apollo missions, were assembled into museum displays. Most of it can be found at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
And then, of course, we have this fictitious Apollo 18 and Apollo 20 found footage. Of course, it was a horror movie that suggests that the mission secretly occurred and encountered extraterrestrials. And of course, it's not based on any historical events. And some people fell for that rubbish.
Yeah, I mean, look at all the movies that they were making during that time period, eh? Like, and they're
Yep.
still making space movies today. They just don't stop. And that's where people they fall into the fantasy of the thing. And of course, to make it sound like it's easy to go to the moon, they say, well, we're headed for Mars. Our next stop is Mars, right? That's like a guy that's got a Model A Ford in his garage, and he said, I'll just pull this out in its original condition, and I'm going to win the next Daytona 500 with it. I mean, the technology of the spacecraft is more than 60 years old. And the basic premise of a launch vehicle is over 100 years old. Liquid fuel rockets. I mean, these things have to change before there's going to be any real change. If you're actually going to look at reality and you're going to send people into space, first of all, you have to bring enough equipment and environment and be able to launch it. There aren't launch vehicles able to do that. Then you have to look at all of the consumables, the amount of energy you're going to be using, the amount of oxygen, food, everything else. You're going to have a proper washroom facility. You're going to have to be able to generate a gravitational field for these people to walk around in and enough space for them to walk around in. The spacecraft is also going to need an airlock system, if you're going to do spacewalks and stuff like that, because you can't just evacuate the entire environment because everybody has to be in an EVA suit if one person is going to step out.
Yeah, of course they do.
That's not logical to do that.
Yes, but are they going to be throwing their EVA suits out the airlock just like they did on Apollo? That is when they finally do reach the moon, Artemis II. But perhaps Elon Musk's AI robots will get to Mars next year in Starship. The one that keeps exploding every time it touches the water because it keeps missing the landing pad. And these AI robots are supposed to be on Mars next year, end of 2026. Well, here's the problem with that too. I was watching this one channel and the fella says, yeah, he says that's a really good idea, send these robots ahead. But he says, there's one problem with that. They might work on Earth just fine. But what happens when they're introduced into that Martian environment, when they have all that radiation, the nice hot sun, and to boot, no Van Allen radiation belts? He said, those robots, the internals are going to be cooked. So he has hundreds of these robots in heaps all over Mars, in piles. And then the very last robot carries the very last robot that had collapsed, goes and it drops it on the pile, then it itself falls on the pile sideways. So now that's the end of them all, because the radiation has cooked all of the components, and not only the components, but it's cooked the robots themselves.
But they'll get an alien upgrade and they'll become just like V'ger.
Yeah.
Looking for the creator.
And of course, something that's not often referred to is the vacuum of space. There's a vacuum around Mars as well. Of course, you can harden a craft against radiation. You can also ensure that it can withstand the vacuum of space. But if you build something on Earth and you don't test it in a vacuum, and there aren't facilities here on Earth to test it at the level of vacuum encountered in space, you're trusting to luck. You're just going to hope it works.
All right, what about Mars then? Let's take a look at the Martian atmosphere and compare that to Earth. What do you think it is?
It's very small, the atmosphere on Mars, but you've got
4%?
the vacuum all the way between Earth and Mars, a few 100 million miles. You've got to travel through that vacuum, and that is quite severe. There's going to be less vacuum on Mars because you do have a small amount of atmosphere. But before you get there, you're exposing it to full vacuum of space, 10 to the minus 15, I think that figure is.
I was watching a movie the other night. I was talking to Robert about it. Saturn III, 1980 version of a film. And there was one section in there where one of the bad guys just opened up an airlock and let a guy get sucked out of it. Now, the special effects that they were using when the guy was falling out through the airlock, like he had some kind of a flight suit on and a helmet as well on the thing. But when he went out through the airlock, there was a bit of a grate, steel grates across it. And when he hit the grates, it was like he was frozen and he broke into pieces.
Oh.
So that is what a movie director or the special effects guys decided that was going to happen when you instantly went into a vacuum. You're instantly going to freeze. Like they're in deep space, they're out at Saturn, right? That's the effect that they used. It looked like the body had frozen and it just cracked open and you can see it all red inside, like the suit cracked, everything cracked. The arms broke, the torso broke open and everything when he went through this grate. So there's the different ideas that people have about being in a vacuum. It's going to like freeze dry you instantly. And of course, at minus 270 degrees out there, of course, it will do that.
It's going to make it very quick.
Well, we can do it with liquid nitrogen. That's only minus 190 degrees, right? You drop a banana and it's frozen solid like that. Well, that would happen if you go down to almost absolute zero at that point and you step out into that vacuum. That's what's going to happen to your body. There isn't enough insulation in a suit or anything else to combat that.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing happened to those woolly mammoths that they dug up in Siberia. I mean, they were all deep frozen. Something must have happened.
Yeah, and they still had grass in their mouths.
Yeah,
Yeah, never mind the fact that they could already be in minus 30 or 40 degrees and survive.
it was very quick, deep frozen very fast,
Yeah.
which is what happens here on Earth when you get frozen vegetables or frozen meat. It's done very, very fast indeed.
I think the term for that is IQF, individually quick frozen.
And we can do that here on Earth, but we're still doing it inside the atmospheric pressure that we've got. It's just lowering the temperature. It lowers it very fast. And on Mars, you step outside the craft, very cold indeed. On the moon, very cold indeed. How do you resolve that problem? That hasn't been discussed.
No, I think that's going to be that sunny side and shadow side of any vehicle on the lunar surface is absolutely going to be a problem. The materials, just the spacecraft itself, is going to experience the expansion on one side and contraction on the other side. And any of the seals that might be around the doors or anything else are going to be affected. You're going to distort the physical craft.
Yes, well, if this astrorad radiation protection that they're making for the vests, if they're going to be placing some of that between the walls, they're going to have a problem because this is made of a polymer. So how's that going to function in negative 250 degrees Fahrenheit?
We don't know. It's never been tested,
No.
let alone tested in a vacuum as well. You've got the vacuum, you've got the temperature. All of these things need to be tested. Where's the testing? It hasn't happened. It's ridiculous, and they expect us to believe it. There's an interesting discussion on Joe Rogan and Matt Walsh discussing the moon landings, about 15 minutes. But it's interesting discussion because he actually believes that it happened. Because how do you keep that number of people in the dark if you're hoaxing it? And of course, Joe Rogan doesn't go into that in any detail. He makes a few good points.
I can't believe how he believes how this happened and the explanations that he's giving for this. It's hard to tell what Rogan really believes. It really is. In that interview, it's like 1 minute he's for it, and then the next and then he's kind of opposed to it. And then there's a couple of things that he said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I agree. It's a very strange show. The ball's going back and forth like in a tennis game.
I think Joe has to maintain a neutral position. Maybe he can argue that there are things which don't add up, and he mentions Bart Sibrel and some of the things that he discusses. Because of his position in the broadcasting world, he has to maintain a neutral position. I mean, Matt Walsh asks some reasonable questions, but they're so easy to answer. How could so many people be involved? How could you keep so many countries quiet? Because they would be the first to blow the whistle. Well, we know that they did. You just got to look at the information, you've got to look at the evidence to see that the Soviet Union didn't actually believe America had landed on the moon. They said they did because they wanted to maintain a degree of cooperation. In the same way that Kennedy, when Gagarin first flew in space back in 1961, Kennedy congratulated the Soviet Union. Doesn't mean to say it happened, but politically, it was advisable for him to say, okay, yeah, we saw it. The fact that Yuri Gagarin didn't actually land in the craft he was launched in and mysteriously died a few years later, 1968, in a plane crash which has never been fully explained, and his spacesuit was found on top of a tree, Gagarin's flight suit that he was in, because Gagarin couldn't fly the plane. Some interesting anomalies in that story as well.
They put people up that can't fly the vehicle, eh?
Yeah, they're passengers. That's what Aldrin said about Apollo. We're passengers, which they were. They were just there to make up the numbers, change the diapers.
Yeah. We're back to the diapers again. You can't imagine that in reality, that you're doing that for 4 people.
I know.
And you're going to sit there and there's nothing in the transcript about this procedure. Nobody's cracking jokes. And you're going to now have a woman on board. And quite literally, she's going to have to spread her legs and have somebody vacuum her up and clean her off. And then you're going to end up a 10-day trip, a minimum of 120 diapers.
Where are you going to store them?
You can't throw them out the window. So, and
So
they're going to stink a little bit 10 days in. Honest to God, that is the reality of it. Who's going to sign up for that? Who's going
Well,
to actually be able to prepare themselves mentally to be able to sit there for 10 days and basically not be able to move?
Well, how about sitting there for 4 months on your way to Mars in those maximum absorbent garments?
Oh, but aren't they sticking them to the walls for radiation protection?
Oh, can you imagine? Oh, what a horrific smell that would be.
I mean, they
Wow.
say in space no one can hear you scream, but you can certainly smell.
Yeah, but there's not just the diapers, there's all the wet wipes that they have to deal with, everything else. I mean, you need a gross of diapers on board. That takes
Yeah,
up a lot of room. That's like a master case of diapers that you've got to have on board.
But going back to this radiation, I find it very strange that Helga and Zor were the ones that were wearing this astrorad radiation protection. And yet, the funny thing is they're claiming that the radiation was not that much greater or less than the Apollo missions. Well, why are two dummies wearing these vests then?
And they're
yeah,
taking as much radiation. They're
Yes,
absorbing as much radiation with the vests on.
that's right. So the problem I have is if it worked for Apollo, why are these dummies wearing those vests going around the moon in this Artemis program? You see, it makes no sense. If there's no radiation problem out there, if the radiation is negligible, then you would not need those vests because Apollo didn't need them. Apollo had no radiation protection other than an aluminum sardine can.
yeah. Yeah. Well, of course, if it was all filmed on Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico, they wouldn't need them, would they? There's not much radiation on Earth's surface.
Oh, here's another thing. The Astrorad vests were also tested on the ISS.
Oh, that's useful. That's below the Van Allen belts.
Yeah, so what kind of a valid test is that?
Good point. Why don't they test them on the moon? Send somebody up there with them on and see if it works. If they come back dead, you know it didn't.
Well, they have to get there for real first.
I'm still
Ah,
waiting for them to put monkeys back into space.
the monkey should go before the human.
Oh, maybe those are the four people that they chose. They got monkey DNA in them.
Oh, we've all got monkey DNA, haven't we?
Yeah,
According,
well, these guys have just a little bit more.
yeah, I think humans are a little more intelligent. I think we're going to see a few delays being announced for Artemis II. I think we'll find that it won't launch quite as easily as they expect it to.
Yeah,
So,
but the reality is they have the same problem as Apollo. If you're going to be faking it, you have the same problem. What happens if this vehicle doesn't launch? What if it blows up on the launch pad? What if it blows up 2 minutes off the ground? They've got the same problem, and there is the problem. But like I say, with the amount of thrust that the SLS is, by the way, the SLS new and improved is exactly the same. If you look up the thrust numbers for the space shuttle, it's 7.8 million pounds of thrust, which is exactly the same as they've got today. They haven't improved it. They're using solid boosters on a thing. They're getting the same 7.8 million pounds of thrust. But when they're lifting only a third of the weight, because they don't have a lander or anything else to land on the moon or anything, they're just flying around it. With that much less weight, we should be able to see those numbers when it takes off, because the space shuttle was 266,000 pounds, which was 20,000 pounds less than Apollo was so-called lifting. But the space shuttle weighed that much. So if they're lifting only a third of that, it should come off that launch pad one hell of a lot faster. It's going to reach low Earth orbit and parking over it with 4.5 minutes, 4 to 4.5 minutes. It should be there because the space shuttle did it in 9, right? 9.5. So when the solid fuel boosters thrust off, they last about 1.5 minutes, 135 something in there when they split off the solid rocket. So instead of being at 70 kilometers, they should be at about 160 kilometers because they should be traveling at about 14,000 miles an hour at that point. We should be able to see that difference. And of course, now the passengers, if they're on board, are going to be experiencing more than those launches for the space shuttle were around 3G. Well, they're going to be closer to 6G because this thing's going to be accelerating a hell of a lot faster. And we're going to be able to see those numbers. If it takes 12 seconds to clear the launch tower, well, with very little payload weight, there is a serious problem. We're going to see that instantly. how are they going to match those numbers? Because you can physically see that on the ground when it's launching. They can't fake that. That
No.
part is real. And you can't take the real and the fantasy and stick the two together when it comes to those numbers.